Hello everybody, this is Muhammad Imran. You're learning linguistics and literature with Imran. The focus of today's lecture is kinds of morpheme. If you want to know what is morphology and what is morpheme, so I have already uploaded videos where I define and explain these two terms, morphology and morpheme. So let's begin our today's lecture and learn kinds of morphemes. Splitting of words into pieces. Most native speakers of English will recognize that words like unwipe, hat bracelet, or McDonaldizations are made up of several meaningful pieces and will be able to split them into those pieces. For example, we have a word unwipe. So we can split the word unwipe into two pieces. One is un and one is wipe. So we have two morphemes in the word unwipe. Un has its own meaning and wipe has its own meaning. So native speakers of English will know that how to split a word and what is the meaning of each part of that word. Similarly, we have another word that is hat bracelet, right? So one part is hat while another part is bracelet. Similarly, we have third word that is McDonaldization. So there are three parts, or we can split the word McDonaldization into three parts. One is McDonald, one is and one is Asian. So McDonaldization, right? If you want me to explain the meaning of these words, so to unwipe is to restore deleted data to the hard disk of a computer. So something which is, of course, impossible. Similarly, that a hat bracelet is a handbag with partly decoration, right? And the word McDonaldization is the creation of a vast chains of franchise stores, right? So we can split these words into different parts. Unwipe, hat bracelet, and McDonald is Asian. So McDonaldization, hat bracelet, and unwipe, right? So here we have kinds of morpheme. So morpheme can be divided into free morpheme and bound morpheme. And then bound morpheme can be further divided into prefixes, suffixes, and affixes. So prefixes and suffixes together are called affixes. So these pieces are called morpheme, which pieces that already we discussed here, right? Like un, wipe. So un is one morpheme and wipe is another one, right? So these pieces are called morpheme, the minimal meaning units that are used to form words. So some of the morpheme in one can stand alone as words like wipe. So some of the morpheme can stand alone as a word, so we call them free morpheme. Like wipe is a free morpheme, hat is a free morpheme, bracelet is a free morpheme, and McDonald is also a free morpheme. So these are called free morphemes. The morpheme that cannot stand alone are called bound morphemes. Like in the example above, the bound morpheme are un. So un needs another morpheme to have meaning, right? So un cannot stand alone, right? Similarly, is cannot stand alone, and Asian can also not stand alone. So bound morpheme come in different varieties. Those in one are prefixes and suffixes. So the former are bound morpheme that come before the base of the word. So when a letter or a group of letters come before the base of word, we call them prefix. So what is prefix? Un is prefix, right? And the later bound morpheme that come after the base, together prefixes and suffixes can be grouped together as affixes. So what is prefix? Prefix is a letter or a group or letter that come before the base word. And suffix are a letter or a group of letters that come after the base of a word. And together prefixes and suffixes are known as affixes. We will also know the meaning of affixes in coming lectures, right? Derivational morphemes. New lexemes that are formed with prefixes and suffixes on a base are often referred to as derived word. So when a new lexemes are formed with prefixes and suffixes, right? When prefixes and suffixes are added to a base, are often referred as derived words. Okay, so I'll give example later on. And the process by which they are formed, that process is called derivation, right? So the base is the semantic core of a word to which the prefixes and suffixes attach. For example, we have a word wipe, which is a base word, is a base form of unwipe, right? So wipe is the base of unwipe. So un is not base, un is prefix. So this is a new lexeme. Okay, that in the beginning I told you, I'll give example, right? So we have unwipe, we have a word unkind. So kind is base while un is a prefix. So with the help of this one prefix is added to the base, we form or we create new lexeme, right? And McDonald is the base of McDonaldization. So frequently the base is free morpheme. So the word frequently is used here, not all the time, right? So frequently the base is a free morpheme, not all the time. Sometimes the base may be a bound morpheme, right? As it is in these two cases. But stop a minute and consider the data in the next challenge box. Let's discuss what is in the challenge box. So here we have a challenge for you people. Divide the following words into morpheme: pathology, psychopath, dermatitis, and endoderm. Right? So how can you divide these words into pieces? So you may assume that this can be divided into two parts like pathology and psychopath and dermatitis and endoderm. You may think, okay, that we can divide these words into two parts and we have two morphemes. So chances are that you recognize that there are two morphemes in each word. However, neither part is a free morpheme. If you divide this word into two parts, pathology, right? So neither patho is a free morpheme nor logy is a free morpheme. Logy also needs something else and patho also needs something else. Similarly, derma is also not a free morpheme and titus is also not a free morpheme. So titus also needs something and derma also needs something. Do we want to call these morpheme prefixes and suffixes? Can we call these morpheme like pathology prefixes and suffixes? Not at all. Why? Why we cannot call them prefixes and suffixes, we will explain on coming slide. Would this seem odd to you? Of course, it's odd, right? If we call them prefixes and suffixes, right? Why we can't call them prefixes and suffixes? Let's discuss. If you said that it would be odd to consider the morpheme in our challenge as prefix and suffixes, you probably did so because this would imply that words like pathology and psychopath are made of nothing but affixes, right? Difference between affixes and bound bases. So here we will explain the difference between affixes and bound bases, and also why can't we call them prefixes and suffixes, that the words we explained on previous slide. For example, psychopath. Why can't we call them prefixes and suffixes? We will explain here. So morphologists therefore make a distinction between affixes and bound bases. So bound bases are morphemes that cannot stand alone as words. So we have like two bound bases in psychopath, psycho and path. Psycho is also a bound base and path is also a bound base. So they cannot stand alone as words, but are not prefixes or suffixes. Neither they are called prefixes and suffixes. You can see here psychopath. So psycho is one part of a word and path is another. Or psycho is also a bound base and path is also a bound base. So neither path can stand alone nor psycho can stand alone. But still we can't call them prefixes and suffixes, right? Sometimes, as in the case with the morpheme, path or dum, that can occur either before or after another bound base. We're talking about path or dum. They can occur either before or after another bound base. So they can change, they're flexible, they're movable. So path precedes the base ology but follows the base psych or psycho. Similarly, dum precedes another base in dermatitis but follows one in endodum, right? So it means that these bound bases are flexible. Sometimes they follow another bound base and sometimes they are preceded by another bound base, right? So that's why that we cannot call them prefixes or suffixes, right? So this suggests that path and dum are not prefixes or suffixes. Why they are not prefixes and suffixes? Because sometimes they are preceded and sometimes they follow another bound base. They are flexible. So there is no such thing as an affix, which sometimes precedes its base and sometimes follows it. So prefixes and suffixes, they are fixed. They do not sometimes follow and sometimes precede. But not all bound bases are as free in their placement. But again, here is a problem. That sometimes we will have bound base which will be also fixed, right? And which will not change the place as path. For example, psych and ology seem to have more fixed position. So the former usually preceding another bound base. So in this case, psych or psycho, it does not change its position, its place, it's fixed like prefix. So the former usually preceding another bound base, the later following. Similarly, the base itis, or if you add here to, then there will be titus, always follows, and endo always precedes another base. So why not call them respectively as prefix and suffix then? Then why can't we call them prefix and suffix, psycho? If psycho has a fixed position, right? Then why can't we call them prefix and suffix? So here we have answer on the next slide. One reason is that all of these morphemes seem an intuitive way to have for more substantial meaning than average affix does. So these bound bases have substantial meaning, right? Or lexical meaning. So affixes do not give us lexical meaning, while these bound bases they give, right? So these morphemes seem an intuitive way to have more substantial meaning than an average affix does. So whereas a prefix like unhappy, unwise simply means not. You can see here that the prefix un and the prefix un, they simply mean not. So they are not like substantial meaning. While the bound base we have like psycho or we have path. Psychopath, path has its own substantial meaning and psycho has its own, right? Right. Similarly, we can see suffix ish, reddish or warmish mean sort of, right? Sort of. So psycho or psych means having to do with the mind. So that is substantial meaning, right? And ology means the study of. Path means sickness. Dum means skin. So you can see that all these bound bases have substantial meaning, lexical meaning. While prefix and suffixes, they merely have not like lexical meaning. They just mean like a not, okay, or sort of. And itis means disease. So semantically, bound bases can form the core of word. So prefix and suffixes can't be the core of word, right? That's why that bound bases can't be called prefixes and suffixes. Prefixes and suffixes, they are not the core words or semantically core meaning. So just as free morpheme can. Okay, so figure 3.1 summarizes types of morpheme. We will look more carefully at the meaning of affixes in section 3.3 in next lecture. But right now we will discuss this diagram where we have kinds of morphemes. Here you can see types of morpheme. So morpheme can be free and morpheme can be bound. Example of free morpheme, we have frog and we have ride. And then bound morpheme can be prefix or it can be affix. So the example of prefix will be re and un, right? Like we say reunion, okay? Or we can say that regain or uncomfortable or unkind. Similarly, we have suffix like ness. We say goodness, goodness or badness. Or we have is nationalize, right? And then bound morpheme can be also base, right? We have bound base, which cannot stand alone as word. Like for example, derm and endo, right? So, another reason to believe that bound bases are different from prefixes and suffixes is that prefixes and suffixes tend to occur more freely than bound bases do. So we can find freely prefixes and suffixes than bound bases. So bound bases occur rarely, not freely. For example, any number of adjectives can be made negative by using the prefix un. But there are for fewer words with the bound basis, like psych or psycho. So this is perhaps not the best way of distinguishing between bound bases and affixes, though as there are few bound bases, ology is one of them that occur with great freedom, right? So again, first we learn that this is another difference, that bound bases, they do not occur freely while prefixes and suffixes, they occur. But then we learn that there is exception, right? Because what is the exception? That we learn here that the word ology is one of them, right? Which do not occur freely. So that occur with great freedom, right? And there are some prefixes that suffixes that don't occur all often. Like for example, we have the example that is in width and health. So we will stick with the criterion of semantic robustness for now. We will return in the next chapter to the question of how freely various morphemes are used in word formation, right? So we will go on, we will discuss more and more in coming lectures, right? With regard to bases, another distinction that's sometimes useful in analyzing languages other than English is the distinction between root and stem. In languages with more inflection than English, so there are languages, so we have more inflection than English language. So there is often no such thing as free base. Where we don't have free base? In languages, other languages than English. So all words need some sort of inflection ending before they can be used. Or to put it differently, all bases are bound. We are not talking about English, but we are talking about other languages where we have like more inflection. And every word is attached with inflection, right? So thank you so much. It was all about this lecture. In this lecture, we discussed in detail kinds of morpheme. We talked about free morpheme and bound morpheme. In bound morpheme, we talk about prefixes and suffixes. And then also we talk about bound bases. We learn that sometimes we will have bound bases, but there will be no prefix and suffix. And we also learn why we can't call bound bases as prefixes and suffixes. So in coming lecture, we will talk in detail about affixation, right? The meaning of affixes in English language. Please don't forget to subscribe and like the channel. Thank you so much.